we're going to do in this video is take something that we've drawn and basically clone it and stamp it and twist it into lots of different parts. Now this is a big part of kinetic typography, and the idea of cloning and kind of sampling type is a big part in how this works. So this is very important, and this is a kind of like, it might blow your mind as soon as you kind of like go, oh right, this is how kinetic type actually works. It's just copying bits of type and changing it. So what we're going to do here is actually a very big part of the rest of this course. So even if you don't get it on the first time, we're going to cover this a lot. So if we go to the P5 reference and we scroll down, and we can see where we added things like create canvas, there's this other thing called create graphics. Now I'm going to open this up. And what this will do is it lets us create a normal canvas, which is visible by default, but it'll also create this idea of a stamp. We can stamp something and then copy and paste it as many times as we want. So here we've got something called PG. Don't know what PG stands for, but maybe processing graphic could be. And this is basically making a background with an ellipse. And notice on this one there's two, and it's basically drawing it twice. Now we've written it once and we've drawn it twice. So what we're going to do is set up a new graphic, let's call it, or PG, and basically let's copy and paste this twice. Why? Well, the idea for this is so that we can actually start playing around with sampling and kind of mixing up type a lot more. So we're going to move a few things around. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually set this up. We're going to create a new graphic, and then we're going to add everything that we've just done to this new graphic. So we're going to move things around a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is set up this new idea of a graphic. So let graphic. Now we're doing let graphic here because we want to do it in setup and draw. The first thing I'm going to do inside setup is let graphic equal to create graphic. And this one uses brackets and it's the same size as above, 500, 500. So this is kind of setting up this graphic. It's kind of complaining right now. Oops, create graphics. Sorry, plural on there from up here. So it stops complaining now. And what I'm going to do is take all of this kind of drawing the font thing. I'm going to cut it out and I'm going to move it into setup. That. Now, why have I done that? Well, it should at the moment look exactly the same. Apart from it disappears. Why has it disappeared? Because it's not actually drawing anything yet. It hasn't actually drawn anything to this graphic. So we've just set something up and then it's drawing over it. What we're going to do is add before this graphic. What we're going to do is add all of these things to this graphic. So what I'm going to quickly do before each of these 5 lines is do graphic dot, then graphic dot, then graphic dot, and graphic dot. So on all of these different lines, we're drawing to this graphic, not the canvas, this font in this color with this text size and this particular 01 in there. So at the moment what we'll get is pretty much the same as what we had from before. Now what I can do is basically add this graphic to the page, and there's 2 ways to do that. In the reference it says we can draw it as an image. The other way to do it is to copy this over. So if I go back to reference, I can scroll down, or I can just quickly search, copy. And in here, in P5, there's a way to copy things. Now this looks complex, but it isn't as complex as it looks. So basically we're copying something with kind of a start and an end point. It'll make sense when I talk about it in a sec. What we're going to do is copy and draw this graphic. We're going to stamp it to this page. So we're going to copy this graphic. Now this graphic starts at the top corner, 0, 0. And this is currently 500 by 500. This is its kind of source reference. This is what the graphic looks like currently. Then what we want to do is take that graphic and just stamp it as it should be, 0, 0, 500, 500. So the first 4 numbers are basically the source, kind of always, pretty much always the same. And then the last 4 is what it should look like when you stamp it. So original and then destination, let's call it. So what we should get now is something that looks the same. Now, why is that useful? Well, basically what it means now is we can start to alter how this looks. For instance, if I want to make that a little bit thinner, let's say, how do I want to go? Like maybe say we don't want it to be 500 wide, but maybe 200 wide instead. So now we have a squashed version of this. Maybe I want to make it even more squashed at 100. There it is, a little bit thinner. Now what we can start to do now is copy this even more times. So underneath it, I can do the same thing. I can copy this graphic, starts in the top corner, and this graphic is 500 by 500, because it's the number up here. But we want to kind of add another one, 0, 0, and then let's do 200 and 500. So what we should see now is this kind of overlapping. But let's move this into the right position. Now, how do we want to move it into the right position? Well, instead of it being 100 and 200, let's make it 400, because that fills up 500, of course. And then let's shift this one over a little bit. So instead of this being at 0 and 0, let's just shift it in the x direction, 100, and then it's 400 wide. So now we have something that's kind of a little bit like what we have here. It's just static. So how do we start to move this around? Well, all we're really doing is changing these last 4 numbers on both of these different parts. So that's all we're really doing as part of this. But how do we actually go into animating that? Well, one thing that I could just quickly do is add the frame count. So to do that, I could say, instead of this being 100, I could say frame count. So it starts at 0, goes up 1 each time. As we can see here, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So what we could do on the other one is the opposite. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It goes off the screen eventually, but let's kind of keep doing that same idea. So let's make this one go from 400 or 500 smaller and smaller. So this is going to go 500 minus the frame count, because we want to kind of fill these in, this one and this one in. So together they make 500. So what we're going to see now is this kind of goes the opposite way. Now the issue here is it doesn't go into the right position. It kind of goes in the negative direction eventually. How come? Well, this one starts at 100 in the same way. We kind of want to make it go the opposite way as well. So what we wanted to do is say this is starting at 500 minus the frame count as well. So we want to kind of shift this over as it gets bigger. So what we should see now, that doesn't look quite right. So maybe what we have to do is actually, oh, that's actually just frame count, isn't it? Because it's the wrong way around. So there we go. This one's getting bigger, this one's getting smaller, so that shifts up. So there's the kind of like detail that we have to actually do a lot of this kinetic typography. We've made something and stamped it. Now, of course, what we have on the final design is something that shifts around in a kind of more natural way. What we're going to talk about next is how to add some natural kind of math to this. If you are scared of math, don't worry, it'll make sense. We're only going to do a tiny little bit of math on this.